Hi there. Welcome to the second office hours. My name is James.
And I'm Jessica.
And today we're going to be talking about constraints. Now, we in Kanal's course, there was a question that he asked if we had any analogies for constraints, and there were some really awesome responses on the forums, and I'd like to read about 2 or 3 of them. So one by Brian said, constraints are like parents. You try to go off and do your own thing, but they pull you back into the rigid structure.
Right, and the second one is from Matthew here. Yeah, constraints are like an ankle monitor when you're under house arrest. Something that you slap on to make sure something doesn't, something stays where it's supposed to.
And then a more succinct answer is programmable rubber bands. Constraints are programmable rubber bands. So all these are good constraints, some funnier than others. But to talk about constraints, we have to talk about what auto layout is. And from the iOS developer documentation, we have a definition of auto layout, and I'll just read it. Apple says that auto layout is a system that lets you lay out your app's user interface by creating a mathematical description of the relationships between the elements. You define these relationships in terms of constraints either on individual elements or between sets of elements. Using auto layout, you can create a dynamic and versatile interface that responds appropriately to change in size, device orientation, and localization. And really this has definitely become more of an issue in the last couple of years as there are an increasing number of different iOS devices that have different resolutions, different aspect ratios. For example, my phone is Jessica's phone, so I have an iPlus, she has an iPhone 5, and these have they're there's an echo?
Yeah, so are you muted?
I can check.
Okay.
Okay, I think we've completed or fixed the echo. I apologize for that.
All right.
Should I restart or are we good?
Up to you.
Okay, let me reread what auto layout is. So we can't really talk about constraints without talking about first auto layout. So reading from the documentation that Apple has, auto layout is a system that lets you lay out your app's user interface by creating mathematical description of the relationships between the elements. You define these relationships in terms of constraints either on individual elements or between sets of elements. Using auto layout, you can create dynamic and versatile interface and a dynamic and versatile interface that responds appropriately to changes in screen size, device orientation, and localization. So, and we've seen this quite a bit in the past couple of years as the number of iOS devices has been growing. There's also been changes in resolution and aspect ratio as well. For example, the iPhone 6 Plus and the iPhone 5 and the iPad all have differing resolutions, different aspect ratios, and we need some way to be able to lay out good-looking apps that will appear appropriately on each one of them. And so to put that into practice, we're going to look at my screen here, and we're going to create a new project. So I'm going to click on Xcode. Now, the resolution might not appear right on your screen. I don't know if there's an option to click on the settings cog and change the resolution, but if you can't see it, we may have to wait until the office hours has been finished and it's uploaded to YouTube. So if that's the case, I apologize. Let's go ahead and create a new project, and we shall call this auto layout. It's going to be a single view application, auto layout. Okay, so here in our Xcode project, we're going to go to the main storyboard, and we're going to get rid of a few of these extra views. All right, so looking at the storyboard down here at the very bottom of the screen, you'll see some text that says WNE and HNE. So by clicking on this, you can see this grid. It's a 3x3 grid, and these grids, this grid represents different size classes. Now, each one of these size classes represents a number of grid, just that one grid. And up top it says compact width and compact height. And if you look below, there's some text that says final values for 3.5-inch, 4-inch, and 4.7-inch iPhones in landscape. So what this means is that by clicking this this size class right here, we will be able to view, this will be the view class, or excuse me, this will be the size class for all iPhones in landscape orientation with the exception of the iPhone 6 Plus. Clicking on this button again here at the bottom, I will look at this one. So this is regular width, compact height, and so this is for all 5.5-inch phones, meaning the iPhone 6 Plus, in portrait, or excuse me, in landscape orientation. Right now, you'll see that the intermediate ones, any width and any height, we're going to put that to the side for a little bit and just talk about compact and regular. So clicking on this one, regular width and compact height, this will be the size class for an iPhone 6 Plus in landscape orientation. Finally, or second to last, we have compact width, regular height, and this is for all iPhones in portrait mode. Now finally, at the bottom right, this is regular width, regular height. This is a size class for all iPads in portrait or landscape. Now let's go ahead and look at what these look like in practice. So let's go ahead and click on compact width, compact height, and I'm going to go ahead and add a button here. So let's type in button and bring out a button to this view. I'm going to call this one WC for width compact and HC for height compact. I'm also going to give it a color, a background color. Let's go ahead and make that red. So what we should expect is that any iPhone in orientation, any iPhone in landscape orientation with the exception of the iPhone 6 Plus should be displaying this on their screen. Let's go ahead and add the iPhone 6 Plus button, and we shall call this one WR for regular width and HC for compact height. And let's go ahead and change the color of this one to, let's say, green. Finally, we're just going to skip the iPad size class and go straight to the compact width, regular height, and add one more button, and we shall call this one WC for width compact and HR for regular height. And we'll make this a different color from the rest of them, so how about black? That's a good color. Now, just to demonstrate that this is, in fact, what's going to be showing up on our devices, let's go ahead and launch this on the iOS simulator on an iPhone 6. So I'm going to press this play button, and we're going to wait for the app to build. We're going to show in a little bit how to cut down on this time so we can see what the layout looks like without launching the iOS simulator. All right, so we have it launched right here, and it's in portrait mode. And if it's in portrait mode, any iPhone should have the compact width, regular height screen. So it looks good. Now let's change the orientation of the device. I'm pressing Command right, and we got that red button there. And in fact, that's what we have right there. I could go ahead and launch an iPhone 6 Plus as well, but to save time, let me go ahead and stop the simulator from running, and I'm going to bring up the Assistant Editor, and I'm going to hide this pane on the right. So usually when we bring up the Assistant Editor, we see the associated controller with the view that we have on the left. Let's go ahead and click on Automatic right here in the Assistant Editor and instead choose Preview. This will show us what the phone will look like when it's running. We have an iPhone 4-inch right here. I can click this plus button and click on 4.7-inch iPhone. So this will simulate a iPhone 6. I can press plus again and get iPhone 5.5, and this is going to simulate an iPhone 6 Plus. I'm able to change the orientation of any one of these devices by pressing this little icon that appears at the bottom of it. And so you'll see that it responds appropriately. So an iPhone 4-inch has the black button right there and the red button like that. And the iPhone 4.7 should have the same functionality. iPhone 6 Plus, remember, it was a little bit different for the orientation layout. So we should have the green button show up instead. Clicking on that, we have that green button showing up right there as well. Now, knowing these different size classes is helpful for a developer to be aware of, because we want our app to respond to the person's iPhone accordingly, depending on whatever iPhone the person has, whatever orientation the iPhone is in. Now, this could be, in many circumstances, very time-consuming to make a view for this constraint, or excuse me, a layout for this size class, a layout for a second size class, a layout for a third size class, and a fourth size class. And so what we're going to introduce instead is the concept of any. And so any means that if I were to highlight over this grid right here, we see any width and any height. And so that means that any iOS device of any width and any height will show what's in this view. So I'm going to go ahead and create a button and place it on here. So I'll place it right there on that size class, and we are going to call it, we'll call it button 1. We're going to be adding more buttons in the future. And let's go ahead and make this button orange. I'm going to click the background, make it orange, and you'll see here on the right-hand side, the assistant editor, where I have the preview of my different devices, you'll see that button 1 is appearing on all of them, even though the iPhone 6 Plus and iPhone 6 and iPhone 5 have different size classes. And it still stays there when I change the orientation. So true to its name, it appears on any height, any width device, and any orientation.
So by that, do you mean any is one view to rule them all?
Yes, this is the one size class to rule them all. Now, let's go ahead and declutter our app a little bit by getting rid of this black, green, and red buttons. And then I'm going to let Jessica go ahead and explain a little bit more, or actually introduce the concept of constraints. So getting rid of that red button right there, let's switch to regular hit compact height, get rid of the green button, and then finally compact width, regular height, get rid of the black button. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that button 1 is appearing on all of our devices, but really kind of in a random spot. So Jessica's going to talk a little bit about constraints.
All right, sounds good. So James is able to show us how to view different elements on different devices. So now let's kind of move into using constraints to pin elements where we want them to go. So let's take a look at this button 1 here. So I want it to be centered vertically and centered horizontally, so right smack dab in the middle of any of my devices.
First, we should go ahead at the bottom and make sure that we are in the any configuration.
Nice. Thanks for calling that out.
Perfect.
All right, so now we have this here. And so one way to do it, so let's actually, you've probably, as you're going through the course working in Xcode, you've probably seen those blue guidelines kind of appear as you're moving your element around. So let me try to get it so it highlights centered vertically and centered horizontally for me. So there we go. So let's see if that actually moved my element to where I want it to go. So taking a look over in the preview pane, I see that it does not move it centered vertically or horizontally. And why is that? So even though we've moved it to the center of these blue guidelines, these guidelines are just merely lines. They're actual constraints we've put in. So to put in the constraints, we can hit Ctrl and drag from the button outside into the container. And we see here we have these options. So first off, I'm going to center it horizontally in the container. And so as we look in the preview here, we see that in all of the devices, the button has been moved to the center vertically. Oh, wait, sorry, horizontally. And now we're going to move it and center it vertically in the container. So there we go. So in all the previews, it is smack in the center. So now, actually, what if we had gone and tried to move the button, to the center without using those blue guidelines to begin with? So what if the button started off here, and I wanted to Control-click out into the container and center it vertically, and then Control-drag and center it horizontally. So that should, I'm assuming that should move it to the center. But if we take a look into the preview here, we see that it doesn't. And I wonder why that is. So let's take a look, dive deeper into our constraints. So if we click on one of the constraints here, and we open up the right pane, so we'll see here on the side we see this constants value. So up here on the right. So constants, you can think of it as in algebra we had the equation y equals mx plus b. So this constant is kind of like that b where we're shifting the element up or down or left or right a certain value. And so that's what's happened here. So because this button has started out in this view, in this spot, Xcode has gone and given us this constant and said, okay, so we're going to use where you've put this button initially and use that constant value. But we don't want that. We want it to be centered down at that vertical center mark. And so if we take a look over here on this constraint, we see this similar thing over here happening. So the constant is at 122. We can change that to 0, and that will move it to where we want it to actually go.
What's that?
Yeah.
Looks like you're breaking up. Do you want to try moving the mic closer to you?
Okay.
Is the image quality breaking up or just our voices?
I think just her voice. So
Okay.
how about we try start again and see what happens.
Okay. So let's see. I'll just kind of should I recap what I just did, or just kind of keep going?
Yeah, I guess we could just delete these two constraints
Okay.
and
then
add the constraints as if the button weren't placed on those blue guidelines.
Okay. So yeah, to recap, so we're going to try to move this button, center it vertically and center it horizontally. So what I was doing was control clicking from the button out, and it gave me this list of options. And then I'm going to control click from the button out again, and then center it vertically there. And we see that it's not actually centered horizontally or vertically in the previews. So other way to check constants is to click on the element in the storyboard, go off to the right here in the right panel, and click on Size Inspector. And so we'll see here that it shows the constraints that are related to the element. And so these are the two that are related to this button 1 element. So we can click Edit, and so it also shows us the constant value here that we saw previously when we had just highlighted the constraint itself. So we can change this to 0, and so that moves it that way. And then we'll move this to 0 as well. And so that does the same thing. And so as we're going through this, you'll see that there are several ways to go about doing the same thing. And so that's one of the cool things about it. And so throughout this office hours, we're just going to go about showing you a variety of ways to do the same thing. But yeah, so.
And add another button to it.
Yeah, like James. Button 2. So 2. All right. The color of this one. Let's make it a nice fluorescent green. All right. So as we can see here, even though in the storyboard it looks like it's vertically aligned above it, button 2 is actually kind of all over the place, right, in the previews. So how do we vertically space it above? So we can click button 1, do the control clicking up to button 2 again, and we have the option of vertical spacing. So click that. We've seen here that in all above button 1, and it's all the same in all those preview devices. Now to make sure that it's straight above button 1, there's the option to control click up to button 2. And so we have these 3 options here. And so we have left, center, and right. So you can think of these sort of like when you're working through a Word document, you have left align, center alignment, or right alignment. And so in our case, we want it to center align it above the center X value of button 1. So we're going to click that right now. So as you can see here, button 2 has moved to the same center X value as button 1.
Awesome. Now, like just as Jessica said earlier, there are many ways to perform the same function in Xcode. Just you can go about doing it differently. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all of your constraints, Jessica. The document outline. The document outline is found here. Let's go ahead and get rid of the assistant. So I'm going to click the document outline and then constraints. Maybe I can turn on sticky keys so you can see what I'm doing. Let's see here. constraints. Okay, so now on the bottom left-hand side of my screen, hopefully you'll be able to see what keys I'm pressing, like the Control, Option, Command, Shift, whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and choose all of our constraints here and delete them. All right, so another way to add constraints to button 1 is just to choose button 1 and go down here to they're very small icons. They're really hard to miss, and I always click the wrong ones just because they're so small. But I'm going to go ahead and click pin. Let's see, actually, let's click on a line, and I can choose these two options right here: horizontal center and container and vertical center and container. And these are the two offsets that Jessica had mentioned earlier. I'm going to keep them at 0 so we can keep them at the origin. Pressing Add to Constraints puts button 1 right there, smack dab in the middle of the view. Choosing button 2, let's actually choose both of them right there. And I want to say that they are lined up equally, so they are aligned by the X value. So I'm going to click on Align and scroll down to Horizontal Centers. So that means that the horizontal center right here, about where the hand is going to be lined up with the horizontal center right there. Finally clicking on, and you'll see over here that my constraints, oh, I forgot to press Add Constraint, didn't I? Let's do that. So horizontal centers, Add Constraint, and now you'll see I have 3 constraints there on the document outline. Now clicking button number 2, I'm going to go ahead and click on it and click on this I-beam right here and add some sort of constant. So let's say 30 and add constraint. So this is going to add the spacing. Now, one thing that we haven't been talking about really as we've been going through this demo is that plenty of times we've had these orange lines pop up and these orange dotted lines pop up as well. So let's go ahead and talk about what's going on there. Now, if I were to let me go ahead and close my document outline and open up the Assistant Editor so we can see the preview. So we can see here that all of our devices, the iPhone 4-inch right here, the iPhone 4.7, the iPhone 5.5, and we can even change the orientation of them, are displaying what we want to see. However, Xcode is giving us a problem. It says that it's giving us some sort of warning. So there's 3 different ways that we can look at this warning. The first way is to click on it right here, and that will bring up the Issues Navigator over here on the left, and it says, Misplaced View, frame for button 2 will be different at runtime. All right, so we'll take care of that in a little bit. Let's close that. The second way to view the warnings and errors that Xcode is giving us is right here on top of our main storyboard. We can click on this yellow triangle here, and it will tell us the same thing. The third way that we can do this is by clicking on the document outline. And right here, next to View Controller Scene, there's a little icon that appears. You can click on it, and it will also show that same error, or in this case, the same warning. Now, by clicking on the yellow icon in the document outline, we're able to see some ways that Xcode can fix it for us. I'm going to choose Update Frame right here just to update it. You'll see that this warning goes away, and it's fixed it. So let's talk a little bit about different ways to fix these errors. So let's go ahead, seeing that these yellow lines, take button 1 up here. And so now we have 2 issues that Xcode is alerting us of. Now, even though I've changed this, the storyboard, and I've disfigured it in some ways, our preview is still the same. So if we were to run this app on a device, button 2 would still be 30 points above button 1, and button 1 would still be right there in the center of the view. So let's go ahead and fix that. What I'm going to do is open up the document outline, and then I'm going to look at, well, if we were to open up the document outline one more time to show how to access these warnings, is to click on this icon, the View Controller Scene, and we'll see that there's 2 warnings that are appearing right now. Button 1 and button 2 are both misplaced views. So I'll click on button 1, And I'll explain the 3 different ways to fix this warning. First one is to update the frame. So given the constraints that we already have, if I were to click on any one of my constraints right here and look at what it's doing, I can use these constraint values to update my frame. So let's try that. So update frame, fix misplacement, and it puts button 1 right where it should be. I can do the same thing for button 2 as well. Update frame, it puts it where it should be. And once again, my previews are never moving, but my storyboard is finally back in place. I'm going to Command Z and put them back in those misplaced locations. I can also click on this button and press Apply to all views in container. And so by doing that, pressing Fix Misplacement, I can fix both of them at the same time. In spirit of doing the same thing in different ways, I can also click on this very small icon right here. It looks like it's a triangle with the absolute value signs on the side of it. Resolve auto layout issues. I can click on that, and I can, let me select them first. I can either update one of the items or I can update all of them in the frames. So all views in the view controller. So let me press update frames, and once again they're put back where they're supposed to be. Let me mess them up again and talk about what this one is, update constraints. So Xcode says in the text right underneath update constraints, it sets the constant for each constraint attached to the view to match the current value in the canvas. So in other words, it's going to look at where the button is placed in this size class, and then it's going to update the size class's elements to reflect whatever we have in this view. Next, we have reset to suggested constraints, and so what this is going to do, it's going to delete all 4 of the constraints that we made for these 2 buttons. Going to delete all those, and Xcode is going to try to guess what constraints I should add for them to appear like this in my views. We don't want any of those. Let me back up for just a moment. So these update constraints and reset to suggested constraints, Xcode is going to do a little bit of guesswork on its part. Sometimes it will guess correctly and put them where it should be. Sometimes it will get it wrong. But it's worth playing with. It could potentially save time. So let's go ahead and update both of these items right here. So that's what we have about the warnings. One other thing to mention is the reason why you'll see these lines appear on the non-blue lines appear on your view is that you'll have an ambiguous layout. You'll have your view has not been updated, and also you might have conflicting constraints. So whatever the reason may be, the document outline should be able to give you some pointers on how to fix those things. One more thing we'd like to talk about is we've demonstrated quite a few things that you can do in auto layout, and honestly, we're honestly just barely scratching the surface of auto layout. We could create a whole nanodegree about how to do auto layouts. We're not going to do that, at least as far as we know, but we can let you know that when you have an idea of how you want your view to look, more likely than not, you can place it here in the storyboard and start adding constraints in order for it to appear how you would like it to appear on all the different devices. So really the only way to master auto layout is to get your hands dirty and start experimenting, messing up, adding constraints, and just seeing what works and what doesn't work. That's how I learned it, that's how Jessica learned it, and I think that's how everyone will end up learning it. So one more thing that we'd like to do, we imagine right now that most of the students are still in Kunal's course trying to make the Pitch Perfect app. And Kunal has some great suggestions on how to align the different buttons in Pitch Perfect. So if you remember in Pitch Perfect, the second view that we have is the Play Sounds view, and that's where you have the 4 different icons of like a chipmunk and Darth Vader, and I think a turtle. And so we are going to show a different way that you could add constraints.
I lost your screen for a second.
Oh no.
Hold on. I don't know what's going on. It's like showing your face, but it's not showing your screen. That's so,
Oh yeah?
That is so weird. What if you try turning presenting screen sharing on and off again?
Okay. Stop presenting to everyone.
Okay. Now try screen sharing.
Is it not working yet?
I don't think so, for some reason. Yeah, like I get your face, but I don't get the actual video. Do you just want to do it without showing? Like, I don't think I can get this fixed next.
Perhaps another thing you can do, maybe try re-inviting me to the chat one more time.
Sure.
If it doesn't work, then we might just have to add it to the forum.
Yeah.
Yeah, and do the Q&A. Let me open up. Oh, sorry about that. All right, you can invite me now. I'm ready.
So many technical issues. Did you get it?
All right, are we able to screen share now?
I don't know. I can't even get like an image of your video up.
Okay. Well, that we could probably either re-record it or do it for next hour's office hours. We're going to just show more ways to work with auto layout. This particular demonstration we were going to do is create 4 buttons and make constraints such that they would put 4 buttons. Each one of the buttons in their own quarter of the screen. So button 1 would be the first quadrant of the screen, and it would change its height and width to fill the entire quadrant of the screen. Same button for button 2, 3, and 4 on those quadrants. I'll go ahead and just do a forum post that has pictures on how to do that. Do we have any questions, Krishna, that we could answer?
Quite a few. So,
Okay.
Mute yourself. Okay, so we can start with logistical questions first. So the first question is this office hour only for people on the first project? Also, is there a way to get one-on-one help?
So this office hours was made with the assumption that most students would be in the first course. The first course is also the only course that talks about constraints, so they aren't going to be talked in the me course or persistence and any of the other courses. So it's mostly geared towards the first course. You can use these concepts taught in.
Okay. Cool. The next question is, when will the rest of Project 3 networking be ready?
That I don't have the answer to.
I actually have the answer to this.
Okay.
So the answer to this is at the end of the month. So yeah, it should hopefully be ready by then. So right now, the first 2 lessons are ready. The following 3 and the final project available. Yeah, the final 3 lessons should be available by the end of the month. Cool. Next question is, will there be an office hours dedicated to optionals?
Yes, actually we've planned for, I believe it's next week's office hours to be about optionals. So we'll post that pretty soon on the forums. Go ahead and add your questions to that well before the class, and we can make sure that we can, right before the office hours start so we can answer them.
Next question is, I think that's it for logistical questions. So let's get to constraint-related questions. So the first question is there a way to apply constraints automatically as you place objects onto the app instead of having to press Ctrl and drag every time?
Okay, so using the main storyboard, as far as I know, there is not. If I find another way, I'll correct myself publicly and let you know. One thing that we didn't talk about, a big thing we didn't talk about in the auto layout, is that this can all be done programmatically. That's way beyond the scope of what we want this office hours to do. So let's say that you want some sort of sizing restraints that are really specific, something that auto layout, or excuse me, the storyboard can't do. You can do that programmatically. But as far as we know, no.
All right. Next question is, notably, at least one of the constraints in the following list is one you don't want. Probably at least one of the constraints in the following list is one you don't want. Try this. 1, look at each constraint and try to figure out which you don't expect. 2, find the code that added the unwanted constraint or constraints and fix it. I'm not sure whether that's a question or.
It sounds like a good comment, something we could have talked more about. One thing to notice when you're adding more and more buttons, in this demonstration we only had 2 buttons, but what if your app has 20 buttons? You could have upwards of hundreds, even thousands of constraints at any time.
Like a calculator or something with lots of buttons you're playing with.
Exactly, and so what to do in that circumstance? Using the storyboard, you have diminishing results trying to select the correct constraint. What I would recommend in a situation like that would be to open up the document outline, click on constraints, expand that view, and then you can click each constraint one by one to see which one is the one that you would like to edit or delete.
All right. I'm going to interject with a logistical note. So starting next week, so this office hours has so far been on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So starting next week, we'll be moving to Wednesday. Do you know what time it is exactly? I think it's at, I want to say 3. We'll have more details for you later. I think it's at 3 p.m. Pacific. This is so Jason can actually show up. So when we first scheduled this time for office hours, we didn't really take into account his schedule. Apparently he teaches on Tuesday nights. So for him to be able to come to next week's optional session, we're moving all office hours starting next week to Wednesdays.
Jason is the guy, if you've gotten to the Me course, the second course, he's the one who introduces the Swift sessions.
Awesome. Okay. Next question about constraints. Is the preview feature in a specific version of Xcode, or did I miss how to enable that?
I don't know when preview was first introduced to Xcode. What's interesting right now is if you go to the documentation for auto layout, it was last updated in 2013 when Xcode 5 was the most recent version of Xcode. So that I cannot answer. I know it's in iOS, excuse me, in Xcode 6.2 at least.
All right. Next question. Is there a way that I could add constraints on nested elements?
On nested elements?
Yeah, so I guess so. You have a view that contains other views. Can you have constraints like all over the place or not?
So there are a few different ways to add constraints to multiple buttons at once. One is, if I'm missing your question completely, please tell me in the forums. But one would be to select all the items that you have that you want to add this constraint to. And then you can click on these bulk buttons at the bottom, like align or pin. And so you can add constraints to several things all at once. Also, another thing that you could do, so one thing that we didn't mention is when we look at the view and we want to pin something to the side to like the leading margin or the trailing margin, that can apply to not just the view that encompasses the whole screen or the whole size class, but it can also apply to smaller views that you have dragged in from the, oh gosh, what's that side called? From the, where you grab buttons and items. I forgot what that part of Xcode is called. Does it have a name?
It does have a name. I don't remember it. Just the thing on the right side.
The thing with a bunch of different elements.
Where you grab the different objects to grab to put on your screen.
I know the shortcut I forgot, but I don't
Okay, if we didn't answer that question to your liking, please just put it back on the forums again.
I would just say that if you have views inside another view, you can have constraints that relate to your container. So the answer, I think, is yes. But yeah, if we're misinterpreting your question, please post on the forums. Live update about when exactly the time is for office hours starting next Wednesday. It's 6 p.m. Pacific rather than 3 p.m., which is what I thought.
6 p.m. Pacific?
6 p.m. Pacific, yes.
Got it.
Okay, next question. Will the office hours change every week?
In terms of topics?
In terms of, sure, so we can go first in terms of time and then in terms of topics.
So I think ideally we're trying to keep it on Wednesdays from now on, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. And topics, yeah, we'll be changing up the topics, so just keep your eyes out for what the next week's topics will be. Coming up will be optionals, and then moving on, we'll be putting up new stuff, so just keep an eye out for that.
Feel free to request office hours on certain topics as well.
Next question is, I think we have a follow-up on the last question you answered. So what this student meant was having a panel with sections with multiple buttons inside of it. So I think in that case, then yes, you can have a view which has those buttons inside of it, and you can have constraints that depend on the containing view. All right, we have a helpful tip. Choose add missing constraints to automatically constrain an element. So yeah, that's something that works well if you have, if your element follows sort of the blue guidelines that you see when you're moving it around. Otherwise, though, it's probably not the best idea, just because the constraints that it'll come up with, it'll pretty much have to guess what they are, unless you have those blue guidelines with you.
Well, and also when we opened up the document outline and we clicked on a certain warning or error that Xcode was giving us, we had those three options. I think the second option is the one being referenced there, which is to make the constraints or update the constraints depending on whatever we have on the storyboard. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's worth trying out, though, definitely.
Yeah. All right. We have time for a few more questions. So let's ask this one. So the buttons disappear based on the dimensions you are working with. Since there are different buttons depending on the screen size, I'm assuming you assign the multiple buttons that have the same purpose to the same corresponding action. How?
I think I'm a little bit, I'm not understanding completely about the action.
Let me try to shorten this. So his question is, so you add multiple buttons, one for each size class. How do you make sure that that button corresponds to the same action?
Okay, what's really interesting about this is that even though we have these different size classes, we still only have that one controller. And so let's say that when we were making our example, we had like the green button, the red button, and the black button. We could control-click each one of those buttons to a certain function or a certain method. And by pressing any one of those buttons, so if I were to press the black button on my device and Jessica were to press the green button on her device in landscape mode, they would both correspond and call that method. Hopefully that was your question. All
right. Next question is about sort of advanced topics in constraints. So it's, are you going to go over content hugging and compression properties with examples? Gosh, we really wish we could have.
That is something we're not going to do today. It's more of an advanced topic in auto layout relative to what we talk about in Kunal's course. That was one thing we considered adding to today's course, today's office hours. However, we figured it would kind of be like a rabbit hole. We don't know when to stop explaining about it. So short answer is no, we're not going to cover it in today's office hours.
And last question. So we'll answer everything else that we didn't get to in the forums. So this is the last question we'll answer right now. How do we get a handle on all the different iPhone sizes, versions, and how to really respond to a portrait layout versus a landscape layout? It started looking more complicated than I first imagined when you were putting all the buttons on different size phones in your demo.
I agree. It is overwhelming. Jessica found a really awesome link. Actually, you want to talk about it?
Oh, yeah. So there's this this great website I found. So it has a kind of visual of the different devices and whether they're compact or regular in height and width. So I guess we could share this on the forum.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a great visual representation of lots of different devices and different orientations, and it makes it a whole lot more manageable. I agree with you. I can commiserate with it being overwhelming when looking at size classes.
Yeah. So print it out and put it next to your bed.
All right. I think that's it. So do you guys want to say goodbye?
No. Well, it's definitely been a pleasure talking about constraints with everyone. This is by no means the end of this conversation. So follow-up questions, comments, suggestions, whatever. Let's go ahead and take them to the forums, and we'll meet there.
Yeah, definitely. Great talking with you.